Hi everyone, it's Come Follow Me Monday, and I want to join you with a little bit of study for 1st Nephi chapter 1 through 5. I will go and do. Last week, as we talked about the title page of the Book of Mormon, I pointed out that it should be a good challenge for us to study the Book of Mormon with the idea that it is the blueprint for the doctrine that you are not cast off forever, because Jesus is the Christ, the eternal God, manifesting himself unto all. We left ourselves with the challenge for pondering about how we can make our Book of Mormon study uh, make Jesus Christ a bigger part of our lives. I hope this week, as you continue with your studies in the Book of Mormon, that you're able to use these first 5 chapters of 1st Nephi to build your faith, trust, and confidence in Jesus Christ, and that you are not cast off forever. This lesson of the first 5 chapters of the book of 1st Nephi actually make up the first chapter of the original book of 1st Nephi as it was translated. These are all part of one big thesis, one statement, these 5 chapters that work together, and that they weren't written until about 30 years after these events had transpired. Nephi wasn't writing in a journal about going back for the plates. He was remembering the things that he did and the lessons that he learned. Hopefully that we are able to take from those lessons, including the uncomfortable parts. This story starts with a message from Lehi, who receives a vision from God as an answer to his prayers, and because of what he learned, he went preaching, and it came to pass that the Jews did mock him because of the things which he testified of them. For he truly testified of their wickedness and their abominations. Now this is interesting. It's something that we're comfortable seeing from our Book of Mormon studies, but when we add this to the studies of the Old Testament, the departure of Lehi just prior to the Babylonian conquest was actually a time of pretty significant religious reform in Judaism. It's known as the time of King Josiah and the reforms of King Josiah, which eliminated idolatry and welded people to the commandments. And yet, even in the midst of this, Lehi testifies to the people of their wickedness and their abominations. One must wonder what their wickedness and their abominations were, if they had just gotten rid of the temptation toward idolatry which had plagued Israel for so long. It is that secondly he testified of the coming of a Messiah and the redemption of the world. Why would anyone be upset at the idea of a coming Messiah and the redemption of the world? Usually that would be good tidings of great joy. That's the antidote for our wickedness and abominations. Why would that be something that would bother the people? Well, I find as I look in my own soul that sometimes I get upset at hearing that I need a Redeemer and a Messiah, because it implies that I've been bad and I don't deserve to be treated like that. Or sometimes I get upset at hearing that I need a Messiah because I want the recognition for being clever enough to fix my own problems without any help. Talking too much about Christ and the grace of Christ might imply that I have not exercised enough personal effort at being good. Well, this reminds us of what Paul taught to the Galatians when he said, I do not frustrate the grace of God, for if righteousness come by the law, then Christ is dead in vain. Paul remembers even that we have a tendency to want to take too much credit for ourselves. Finally, sometimes I don't like learning about the Messiah and the redemption of the world, because the world doesn't deserve to be redeemed, at least not like I do. I think that may have been the biggest thing that caused Lehi the grief, as he was talking about people with flaws. They understood they had flaws, but they certainly weren't as bad as what would require a Messiah. And they were a good and righteous people of the law. They were handling their own problems and self-improvements. And the Gentiles and the Babylonians and the Assyrians certainly didn't deserve to be redeemed, at least not like Jerusalem. But this brings us to point 2, the idea in these 5 chapters of being obedient. It came to pass that the Lord commanded my father, even in a dream, that he should take my family and depart into the wilderness. And it came to pass that he was obedient unto the word of the Lord. Wherefore he did as the Lord commanded him. Look at the word wherefore. That's the answer to the question of why, isn't it? It means because. Lehi took his family into the wilderness not so that he could be obedient, but because he was the kind of person who responded to revelation. Lehi's obedience did not depend on the Lord's commandment. It was part of Lehi. It's part of who he had become. In the end of this block, Nephi tells us that surely the Lord hath commanded us to do this thing, and shall we not be diligent in keeping the commandments of the Lord? Sometimes keeping the commandments of the Lord, like Lehi, makes us look unsophisticated and foolish. Even his own family members thought Lehi was being foolish by his devotion to the voices that he was hearing. With the case of Sariah, obedience sometimes requires us to face our greatest fears. She spoke against Lehi, calling him a visionary man because he had sent their sons back on a fool's errand, on a one-way trip to confront Laban about the brass plates. Her obedience required her to face the fear that her children would not be coming back. For Laman and Lemuel, obedience requires sometimes that we give up what we've rightly earned. Now they deserved the fruits of their labors, or as they called the lands of their inheritance. They expected that they were going to get a payday for their hard labor. But in place of getting paid for this labor, they were asked to be obedient and leave the lands of their inheritance. But Nephi is the one that causes me to ponder the most. Nephi's obedience requires him to give up his core value of right and wrong. When the angel commands him to slay Laban, Nephi had always thought of himself as a good person who had been born of goodly parents, and yet he was being asked to do something that was going to make him absolutely the villain in this story. If you don't think that Nephi thought about that when he's writing this down 30 years in hindsight, he's not seeing himself as the grand hero who would go and do anything the Lord commanded him because the Lord was going to let him kill somebody. Nephi was looking back and surely must have wondered if there couldn't have been another way for the Lord to have blessed him to be able to get these plates without killing anybody. Surely this must have caused him to wonder why he didn't just take Laban's clothes and run off with the same ruse and get the plates and run off into the desert. Why would he need to cut off Laban's head? As Nephi ponders this throughout his life, I think this is part of what makes him cry out, "Oh, wretched, wretched man that I am." Nephi sees that he's had to give up his core values, his idea of himself as a good person, so that he could be obedient to the things the Lord commands. So we learn that being diligent in keeping the commandments of the Lord might be risky, could be scary, probably isn't rewarding. It isn't about being morally superior, and it isn't developed by greater discipline or rigor. It's developed by faith. It is the trust that Lehi knew that the voice he was hearing was the voice of God, that Nephi's commandment was a commandment coming from the Lord to do a thing even as distasteful as it might have felt. Our obedience is not a reflection of ourselves. It's a reflection of what the Lord is to us. as we seek to become the kind of people that will respond to the voice of the Lord and let God prevail in our lives, we do that by increasing our understanding, our capacity, and our desire to be with and like the Lord. As you think about anybody who could be blessed by hearing a short Come Follow Me lesson, please pass along this idea to text the message at CFMSPRNG24 to the number 81010, and I will include them in these weekly messages. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you next week. Have a good study.